Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach. Always available, too, at carolthecoach.com.
Now, I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself?
Yeah, that's what we always ask our clients. Do you really want to change that about yourself? And here's what I know to be true, that oftentimes clients do want to make the needed changes to improve their life. But until they get down to the pain that is really plaguing them, until they process the old traumas that have occurred in their life, whether that be around sex or around physical, emotional, verbal abuse, they will keep reenacting the trauma in a different way. And that just does not work. I mean, we really know to be true that the best thing that one can do is to really process old memories, old experiences, just so that you don't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so tonight we're going to be talking with an EMDR therapist. She is Nikki Barnes, and she has been doing EMDR for several years, and she's going to be talking about what that is and why a therapist who works with trauma and attachment and pain, why they would want EMDR. You know, how is that different from hypnosis, as well as all the other therapies that are out there. And you know, if you've listened to the show before, we have really worked diligently to inform you about different techniques that may be helpful in your special situation. Sexual addiction is a specialized niche, and it requires a variety of techniques. And I've got to tell you, when I took this training in sexual addiction, I said to myself, I really want to help clients get to the old wounding so that they do not reenact that same wounding over and over and over again as adults. And what everybody said to me in my training was, you've got to learn EMDR. And I said to myself, what is EMDR? You know, and then I heard it was eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And I said, oh my gosh, you know, I can't even say that, let alone practice that. All right, 6 years later, not only did I get trained in it, but I too am certified. Excuse me. And so what I know is it's one of the most effective modalities for people that have really been through a lot of trauma, a lot of looping in their brain when they've experienced something and they can't seem to move out of it. And so I am so happy to practice it and was so happy that Nikki agreed to talk about it. You know, I don't always want to be the only one talking on the show. You know that I work really, really hard at educating and informing you about what you need to do. And I get the experts, the leading experts in the field. I get them because I know you deserve to hear what they have to say about sexual addiction, about being a partner, you know. And so my mission is to bring you the best education possible. And for that, I have a lot of gratitude. I'm just so thankful that I can do it, that you're in my listening audience. We are up to almost 300,000 open downloads a week. Now, it's just super interesting that people don't call the show. They email me. They call me individually. They don't call the show because they don't want to be recognized. They want it to be anonymous. So if you have a question, you can always feel free to contact me at carolthecoach@AOL.com, and I will put your question on the air. Now, I have an interesting group of people that have been sending me information that they thought would be helpful for my listening audience. And, you know, you may wonder, what is it that pulls people into pornography, especially kids? And I want to tell you that, you know, people are generally very naturally curious. And there is so much out there, obviously, in the field of pornography that their curiosity is really activated. And we are a society that is over-sexualized, so sexualized images are really, unfortunately, something that the brain craves. What we know is that it is absolutely enticing to not only want to see these images, but to see what else is out there that we haven't seen before. Now, it is a human default setting where studies show that 90% of college-age males and 30% of college-age females view porn regularly. And when they're viewing it, they're not addicted. It's like any other addiction. It takes time. It takes effort. And so the good news is, unless you've been looking at porn since you were very, very young, if you're college age, you may have developed a bad habit and a dependency, but more than likely you're not addicted. However, if you are an adult who's been looking at porn for 30, 40, 50 years, you started out with magazines, then went to VHS, and you've been captivated by what the Internet has to offer, and you can't stop, and you have made many efforts to stop, and the porn that you're looking at has become much more dark, much more, how do I want to say this? It's not just about being dark, but people say that they look at porn that they never would have thought they would have looked at a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. This kind of viewing escalates, and it gets more and more aggressive. And as a result, what we know to be true is that as they go to the dark side and they look at gang banging, or they look at bestiality, or they look at rape, aggressive porn, child porn, they are appalled and certainly ashamed by their own behavior. So it starts out innocent, but it doesn't end that way. And that's why I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really look at your behavior and ask yourself, what is it that is so captivating about pornography? And then what do you do about it? Well, you got to recognize the power behind it. You know, there's no doubt that any kind of sexual addictive behavior has a lot of power. And so I would ask you to recognize that so that you don't sell that situation short. Now, what do I mean by selling it short? What I mean is that it is so important for you to recognize that this addiction has total power and control over you, and that you can no longer manage it. It, in actuality, manages you. And that when you try to stop, you go through what we call kind of a sexually anorexic period, where you say, I am going to stop and I'm no longer going to participate in that. And what ends up happening? Well, you may go an hour, a day, a week, but you can't stay away forever. It compulsively calls you back to that behavior, and when you go back to that behavior, you start back at the point that you left. You know, you don't do it for 5 minutes, you do it for 5 hours. And knowing that, you can realize that it's not an act of willpower. You have to have recovery tools that will, in actuality, circumvent the desires. You know, you've heard me say what they are, but clearly, tonight in my men's group, we had the men get up and talk about the anger train, and they had to rate themselves in terms of who was the angriest and who was the least angry. And then I had them line up with who worked the strongest recovery program versus the weakest. It was not an exercise to shame anybody. As a matter of fact, sometimes they volleyed for, no, I was doing the best, or no, I was doing the worst. And we saw a direct correlation between people that worked the recovery program and people who worked through their feelings. And when they worked through their feelings, they were less likely to engage in pornography. That is the beautiful thing. So I cannot emphasize enough how this is a process that needs to be guided by a certified sexual addictions therapist. There are wonderful therapists out there who do great work, but very few of them know how to work with sexual addiction. So if you are wondering how the heck can you get to a certified sexual addictions therapist, you go to sexhelp.com, you put in your zip code, and you find the closest CSAT, certified sexual addictions therapist. And if there is not one, for 200, 300 miles, a mile radius, then, contact one of us that's willing to do some Skype sessions with you to get you set up with the right recovery tools. I know I offer it, and there are many, many, many other therapists that offer consultations. We really can't do therapy over Skype because it's not HIPAA protected. Can do is get you to the right places. We can work with you for 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions, get you on the right track, and then, once you've got the right tools, you can get the help that you need. And that will be through bibliotherapy. That will be through seeing a CSAT. That'll be through, phone meetings, 12-step meetings or regular meetings, having a sponsor, doing your 12-step work, prayer, meditation, journaling, accountability tools. You remember last week we had Mike Turk on who talked about polygraphs and how effective they are in building trust and holding the addict accountable. They're not there to shame you. They're not there to work against you. They're there to work as a tool. But I got to tell you, you got to have somebody who knows what they're doing, because you won't get an accurate test if you've got a polygrapher who's never worked with sex addicts. If you have a polygrapher who doesn't do the pre and the post testing. So, feel free to contact me. I'll get you to the right people in your city or state or even country, if you will. I'll put it out there to our listserv, and we'll find out who is available to help. Because that's what this show is about. You're not in this alone. We are here to help you figure out what it is that you need so that you can get healthy. And if you're a partner listening to the show, we know that you have as much to work on sometimes as the addict, because this has caused such devastating pain. And that's where EMDR can be very, very helpful to you also. We see a high correlation between partners of sex addicts and early childhood trauma. And that is why tonight we've got Nikki Barnes on the show, and she's going to be talking about EMDR. So, Nikki, welcome to the Sex Help with Carol the Coach show. How are you tonight?
I'm good, Carol. How are you?
Excellent. As always, on Monday nights, this is how I wrap up the evening. I do this show, and we really kind of help sex addicts and their partners to figure out what they need to do to get healthy. And so I was so happy that you were willing to come on the show and talk about a treatment that is near and dear to both of our hearts. Tell us a little bit about EMDR. For instance, what does it stand for, and how does it work?
Well, EMDR stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And it's a psychotherapy approach, and it's designed for working with de-stressing or traumatic memories. And the theory behind EMDR is that many psychological difficulties are the result of de-stressing life experiences that may not have been stored properly in memory and are said to be unprocessed or even blocked. And these traumatic memories may need some help to become processed, and EMDR is one way of doing this.
Okay, and so you got involved in this treatment for a variety of reasons. Can you share a little bit about what made you decide to learn EMDR and to practice it with your clients?
Well, I began my journey with EMDR probably in 2010 because I was seeing a lot of survivors of childhood trauma and was finding that there wasn't always an effective treatment that was quick enough or that people were finding success with. And I had heard about EMDR from colleagues and had heard many good things about the effectiveness and about the success rate with EMDR that they had found with their clients. And so it was something that I definitely knew that working with survivors of childhood sexual abuse or of trauma was something that I wanted to add to my repertoire.
And so talk a little bit about the training that you had to participate in to get prepared to give this specialized treatment.
I was trained through the EMDR Institute, which is out of California. And at the time that I was trained, there were not a lot of trainings offered in the state of Indiana. Therefore, we had to travel. And my initial training was a 3-day weekend training in Cincinnati, and a lot of that was initially lecture and classroom, and then there was a hands-on portion where we went through the therapy and did the therapy with colleagues and were supervised by consultants. After that initial weekend, we did have several hours of ongoing supervision. I believe it was 12 to 15 hours of ongoing supervision with consultants, where we brought cases and different presentations to them in order to make sure that we were doing the treatment effectively and according to protocol. After that first weekend, there was a second weekend that was along the same lines, 3 days again, with the classroom training and the lecture, and again with practice and supervision, where we did do the protocol on one another and were given feedback by the consultants. And then in addition to the training, the initial training that we had, I've sought ongoing training for early trauma protocol with out of New York. I went to Buffalo, New York, and had that protocol with Katie O'Shea. And I've also had the child and adolescent protocol with Anna Gomez, who did come here this spring. So I've had that additional training for some special protocols for working with EMDR.
Okay, and one of the things that I know is that in the field of sexual addiction, there is a lot of trauma and what we call sexual trauma reenactment. And I was just telling our listening audience before you came on that clearly therapists across the country were saying that EMDR was the therapy of choice in working with trauma. So can you talk a little bit about why that is, that EMDR is so effective with trauma?
Well, trauma memories are a little bit special. They're different than a normal memory. Normal memories are stored in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, and you can think of the hippocampus as a kind of a librarian, which catalogs or processes events and stores them in the right place. But when traumatic events happen, such as abuse or violence or something such as that, which is so overwhelming, the hippocampus can't do its job properly. So when that happens, the memories are stored in their raw, unprocessed form. So the trauma memories are easily triggered, which can lead to them replaying and causing distress over and over and over again. So when you use the EMDR, you can access these memories and store them properly in the hippocampus where they should have been stored initially, which will then alleviate some of that triggering, which will cause them to replay over and over and over again.
And so truly, not only does it help them process the memories, but then in some ways it kind of kickstarts the hippocampus, and so that other stored memories can also be processed. I always say it's like a log jam, and when you do some work on that inner child stuff, those core issues, then oftentimes you process a lot of other issues as well.
Yes. There's oftentimes things that will come up. I mean, it's like layers of an onion. When you peel back one issue, something else may be underneath. When you set up the process with EMDR, we call it the targeting sequence process, when you go through to reprocess a memory or an event. And you want to get to the core issue. And at times, it's difficult initially to get there. But when you begin reprocessing, it always comes up. It'll eventually get to that point or you'll figure out that there's something blocking the processing, and you can figure out a roundabout way to get to what the blockage is, and it may be that core belief, which is underlying, whatever the trauma was. So it always comes about.
Now, a lot of people kind of get confused. They think EMDR is like hypnosis. Can you describe the differences?
Well, I think some of the reason people get confused is the eye movement part of EMDR. And the eye movements are important to EMDR because that is what we call bilateral stimulation. And what the bilateral stimulation is doing is it's enhancing the memory processing. And the best way to do that is with the back and forth eye movements. And the client can either do that by watching the therapist moving their hand back and forth, or they can watch a light bar, which has a light that moves back and forth. Or if they can't tolerate an eye movement, they could listen to tones, right, left, or they could have taps on the back of their hands, right, left. So it's a bilateral stimulation, which helps both sides of the brain talk to one another, which crosses that brain corpus callosum, which is the midline of the brain. So it helps both sides of the brain talk to one another. And I think that some of the reason people get caught up in thinking it's like hypnotism is the eye movements. They'll see either the light bar or the fingers moving and think that the person may be losing control or out of consciousness. But there's never a time when the person is not conscious or not totally in control in the session. The therapist is mainly there to guide, to help, facilitate. The client is always totally in control.
Well, that makes sense, and I do hypnotherapy, so what I know to be true is the client is always in control in hypnosis also. But you're right, it activates totally different parts of the brain, and you do that differently, and the process is very different. I mean, with EMDR, you're trying to process some old memories that have become stuck. But with hypnosis, you're oftentimes working with the conscious, subconscious, and unconscious to work together towards a common goal. And so I get why people get confused. That bilateral stimulation with the eye movement really makes them think it's the same thing, but it is not. So I'm wondering, do you believe that EMDR is a form of pseudoscience? I mean, that's a lot of people wonder that.
And there are doctors, even today, psychologists, psychiatrists, that continue to believe that EMDR is some form of pseudoscience, or that it doesn't have the metadata or meta-analysis behind it. But it truly does, and it is a evidence-based practice by the American Psychological Association. So it has been studied, has been proven effective, but because it is a bit of a newer therapy, and it is not something that has necessarily been around as long as some of the other therapies, I think that certain individuals might not understand it, so they may make those claims that it's some sort of pseudoscience. But it does have science behind it. Not all parts of the effect, not all of the neuroscience yet of EMDR can be understood and explained. And not all of the neuroscience that we're learning about even now we can understand and explain. It's all still very cutting edge. So this is all, coming about in this day and age.
Well, and let's just go over, if we can, explain how you have used this with somebody who experienced trauma, and how did he or she process the information and grow from it?
Well, I've used it with several individuals that have experienced traumatic events. And I think a couple of different cases or stories that I wanted to share. Everybody stores traumatic events differently, and some people will store trauma in their bodies. There's a book, I think it's Bessel van der Kolk that wrote it, perhaps. It's The Body Keeps the Score.
Keeps score.
Can't remember for sure. Yes.
That's exactly
and
right.
So
You're exactly right.
So that is saying, that your body's always going to remember these traumatic events. And so I've worked with some clients who've had illnesses or pain that was never medically able to be explained. And, they've been to doctor after doctor, and they finally ended up coming to me with this pain. And they'd had some childhood trauma. We went through the EMDR protocol, and at the end of the protocol, the trauma was reprocessed, and the pain that the woman was suffering was gone. And she had suffered with this pain. I believe it was abdominal pain, if I remember correctly. She had suffered with this pain for probably 20 plus years. And so that was quite miraculous. And then I've also used EMDR with other clients who have had different levels of success along the lines of building self-esteem, recovering from addictions, reprocessing and rebuilding affective circuits such as guilt, love, shame, all these different feelings that should be innate and should be at a certain level and which were disrupted by early childhood trauma. So just many different success stories.
Absolutely. And I find that it can be very, very helpful with abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, because, again, not only does it reprocess issues that have gotten stuck, but it truly is a methodology that allows a person through a bilateral stimulation set to right the wrong by using their voice and saying what they would have liked to have said. I mean, there are lots of opportunities for them to advocate for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. There's often times when I might bring up the question of what would you say to your 7-year-old self, or what would you like to have said at 7 years old to so-and-so, and let them, like you said, advocate for themselves, and that can be very powerful.
Yeah, so obviously this is a very effective treatment. Now, how much time do you typically carve out to work with a client? I guess I want to know how much time can they expect to spend in the office per session? And then for your EMDR, how often would you say you see clients on average?
Well, sessions, usually a session is about 60 minutes. At times there will be times when I will have clients that need a 90-minute session. And then on average for length of treatment, it really just depends. It can be 8 to 12 sessions, or I've had some clients that only needed, 2 or 3, just depending on if it was a single event trauma or if it was something that was relatively a recent trauma. Or then on the longer end, I've had clients that, might come for 15, 16 sessions or so, and then not need to come for a while. And then they may come in later, a few months down the road for what we might call a tune-up. And as far as frequency, it's usually about once a week. It's not something, in my opinion, you'd really want to do more than once a week, because I believe that there's processing that does continue after the session, and that the body, the brain, the mind needs time in between sessions to continue to heal and process. So I do like to only have sessions about once a week.
Got it. And can you share how you feel EMDR is different or compares to other modalities of therapies, in your opinion? And why would you choose it over something else?
Well, I'm trained in dialectical behavior therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. And I do use those therapies as well. And I know that TFCBT, or trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, is what the Department of Child Services actually prefers presently for use with children that are in placement or that are wards of the state. So that's often something that I will use with children. However, I use parts of EMDR along with TFCBT because at times I feel like EMDR can address issues such as the core belief system in conjunction with the other therapies so well. It's very, EMDR is very flexible, in my opinion. It can mesh well with other therapies. And I'm very eclectic as a therapist myself. And I do find that EMDR itself is less re-traumatizing in the fact that you do not expect the client to do a trauma narrative. It's not expected for them to write their trauma history down and then read that out loud. You do not have to do any exposure therapy, anything like that. So it's often easier or less threatening for clients to engage in the therapy when they know that that's not expected.
So that makes sense. In some ways, some of the processes of therapy can actually frighten or scare the client who doesn't believe that they have the coping skills to go through the actual therapeutic process. And your experience with the EMDR is they don't have to do a lot of that work. The work occurs in the brain.
It does. It most certainly does. The work is all internal. The work is all done by the client's brain, by the reprocessing in the hippocampus, in how the memory is stored. The bilateral stimulation kind of kickstarts that reprocessing, and you go through that with the therapist there as the guide, and however much the client chooses to share is how much they choose to share. If they are feeling body sensations as opposed to wanting to share pieces of what they're seeing, they can share that. It's all whatever comes up, comes up. They share whatever they're seeing, whatever they're feeling. It's just whatever happens, happens. It's not, there's not a supposed to or a have to.
Okay. And, obviously, how long have you been doing this kind of work?
Well, I've been doing therapy altogether for about 14 years with individuals and children and families. And I've been in a solo private practice for about 2 years. Previously, I was in a group private practice, and I also work with children at a group home in Lebanon. So I've been doing EMDR.
And if people wanted to get a hold of you, Nikki, how could they do that?
Well, I have a profile on Psychology Today, and then I'm also on the Mental Health America website. And then I also, and my cell phone and my my business cell phone are all listed on Psychology Today and on Mental Health America.
Okay, so they can get your cell phone by going to Psychology Today or Mid-America. Do you feel comfortable sharing that with us tonight?
Sure. My cell phone is 317-413-5673. And I also have email, and it is N as in Nikki, K-R Barnes, B-A-R-N-E-S, @gmail.com.
Now, let me ask you, because obviously you said that some people think this is a pseudoscience, and I've run into some professionals who have done that also, but it's my experience that truly what is a phenomenal experience is that this is the most researched form of therapy in the history of therapy. And one of the reasons is because the founder, Francine Shapiro, had all of us following a specific protocol so that it could be measured and there would be no deviation, and she could find out what worked and what didn't and then modify it along the way. And I truly believe that the book, Getting Past Your Past, is one of the most helpful reads for people who are considering EMDR. Do you recommend that much to your clients?
Yes, I do. I do have that, and I share that with clients frequently, that to read. And I also, I do agree that Dr. Shapiro was very instrumental in making sure that we follow the protocol to the T, so that it is very researched. And initially, a lot of that research was done through the VA and with the veterans and the PTSD and the treatments there. So there is a lot of research and a lot of data that show the effectiveness of the treatment.
Yes, and now I have been studying with a different man other than the people of Francine Shapiro, and his name is Roy Kiesling, and he has actually been a HAP provider, so he has gone out to specific areas where there's been a lot of trauma and crisis, earthquakes, forest fires, war, and has worked with them on EMD and EMD(r), helping them to process their recent experiences right then and there. Have you heard of him, and have you done any of that work?
Well, I did a few hours of supervision with Roy via telephone a few years ago, and I have heard of the EMD and the EMD(r), but I'm not very familiar with exactly how that works. I know that he was at one point bringing that to first responders, but I'm not exactly sure how all that was going to work.
Yes, and so now he is training all of us so that we can even work with people who get stuck with their future templates. Maybe they didn't have any particular trauma as a child, but they really seem to be stuck in terms of their movement to take their life to the next level. And he's finding that doing that future template development can actually occur right away. You don't have to use that as the three-pronged process of, going through and deciding, okay, how does this show up in the present, and what was the absolute worst memory you can think of that kind of parallels your issue, and also the earliest memory. So it's just been fascinating to watch it work in a variety of ways, and I didn't know if you had done any of his work, because I really think, although he is certainly not as rigid in terms of having his therapist do it a certain way, really is somebody who has made great strides in being able to help people, again, in 2 or 3 sessions as opposed to the typical 1 to 2 years. I mean, that's what I really love about EMDR, is that it's just amazing how this stuff works in relatively short amounts of time.
Yes, it really is. It truly is. I've had clients that have had success, like you said, within 2 or 3 sessions, whereas in traditional talk therapy, it may have taken a year or 2 to get to that point of resolution or healing. Whereas, the EMDR can bring that about so much quicker and bring that healing. And then you can get to that point, like you said, with a future template and work on what you want to see happening in the future and handling these issues in the future, so you can start moving forward and working on goals and such, as opposed to focusing on the past and the trauma.
So, if you would, before we end tonight, can you share one of your greatest success cases, whether it be somebody who did actually experience their trauma in their body, or somebody who was able to get past some of those old childhood wounds?
Sure. I worked with a client who had years of trauma, and it was a family, and it was family abuse that went on for years and years and years, and it was sexual in nature. It was emotional abuse. It was just a myriad of abuse. And she and I worked together for several months because of the severity of abuse. And she was working towards getting married and having this relationship, and she was struggling with that and having this relationship with this gentleman. And through the EMDR and through the healing that she experienced with that, even though it was a struggle, and this was not an easy process because of the severity of the abuse, the length of the abuse that she went through, she was able to heal, to find strength, and to move on with her life and with her relationship with this gentleman, and take that to the next step. So I really felt, even though it wasn't total resolution of this trauma, and she had this wonderful success, she was able to find some healing in a few short months with this complex trauma that she suffered through her whole life as a child. As a young woman, she was able to move on and have this relationship and move forward with her life and be successful. And so I really feel like that was a very successful case that I worked with, in which EMDR proved to be the best treatment and the most efficacious treatment at that time. Because if I would have done traditional talk therapy, I would have probably still been talking to her now, 3 years later, and she may have never moved on with this gentleman. So I really feel like that was the best thing for her at that time, and it really helped to move past those trauma memories and those negative thinking errors that she was having.
You can imagine why I think it is so efficacious for sex addicts. They have been through so much trauma and oftentimes are reenacting that trauma as adults. And so getting to the wounds, getting to the childhood of origin issues helps them process things, and it decreases the compulsion that occurs through sexual addiction. And I always say, addicts carry the shame, but partners carry the pain. And so oftentimes you've seen this, I'm sure, to be true with sexual abuse. It's like somebody has been through abuse, a mom, a grandmother, whatever, and then their child goes through abuse, and generationally this pattern continues. And these kids grow up to be adults that then attract, let's say, men who become abusers too. And so it keeps the pattern going. And EMDR really interrupts that by processing those memories differently, and then they no longer attract men into their life that are going to abuse their kids.
Yes, I believe it does, because it targets that core belief of whatever it may be, of I'm not good enough, or I'm defective, or I don't deserve love. And when it disrupts that pattern and disrupts that negative belief, then it in turn disrupts that pattern of attracting those people that reinforce that negative belief. So, when they start to believe something more adaptive, such as I am good enough, I do deserve love, I am lovable, then they'll start to attract people that reinforce those adaptive beliefs.
Absolutely. And, that's one of the things when we do EMDR, we look for the limiting belief, the negative cognition, and then we look for the positive cognition. What would they prefer to believe about themselves? And it is a whole process. For our listening audience, it's where do you then store the feelings in your body and what emotions are primary at the time of thinking about the negative cognition and the recent memory. And it really does change people on a variety of levels, not just their childhood issues, but also how they feel about themselves and what they prefer to believe.
Yes, it does. It really does. It does address the trauma. It does address the issues like we talked about, where they're stored in the hippocampus, and stores them correctly, and addresses any issues that had occurred in childhood that may be unprocessed or raw, and maybe being triggered by things in the environment.
Have you ever worked with a partner of a sex addict?
I have. I've had a couple of clients both clients that are sex addicts themselves and clients that are partners, yes, both.
And did you use any EMDR with them?
The primary therapy actually that I've used with all of those individuals that I'm thinking of was EMDR, and it was very effective in working with the partners specifically. We worked to rebuild self-esteem, it was rebuilding trust, and looking at some of her negative thoughts, and rebuilding we were looking at some of the trauma that was caused by the sexual addiction itself in the marriage, and reprocessing some of that. And it was very effective. And with in working with addicts, I've used EMDR to address various issues, such as, just depending on whatever was going on, it may be different things, but usually there was some anxiety, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, some of those things that I talked about as far as the affective circuits that needed some reprocessing that we would work on.
Well, it's obvious that you know your stuff, and I want to encourage people, if they are in the Indianapolis area, to contact Nikki. If you're thinking EMDR might work for you, go in for an initial session, talk about that situation. Again, she can be reached at nikkib@iumch.org, or you can call her at 317-413-5673, and she will be happy to work with you. Nikki, thank you so much for talking about EMDR and why it's so efficacious with people who have experienced trauma and pain and want to get better in the shortest amount of time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, Carol. I appreciate it.
All right. You have a great week.
Thanks. You too.
All right.
Bye.
So, as you can see, EMDR is a wonderful, wonderful tool that can get down to the trauma and keep you from reenacting the trauma and help you process it. So not only do you work through old childhood issues, but you install new beliefs about yourself that are much healthier and much more accessible to your family, to your coworkers, and to your friends. I mean, everybody wants to hang with people who like themselves, who believe in themselves, and that's going for that mental health. You're going for that cognitive change where you really do appreciate your strengths and you really believe in you. And that's why at the end of every show I say, hey, there will only be one at you at all times. Fearlessly have the courage to be yourself. Next week we are going to talk to a hypnotherapist who works specifically with sexual addiction. She was doing workshops, and I said, hey, we want to have you on the show so that we can talk with you about how you do this with sex addicts. So we'll catch you next week. And as I always say, you make it a good one and create the life you deserve. You're listening to Sex Help with Carol the Coach. I'm Carol Jurgensen-Sheets, and I will see you next Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.